I'm Dr. Nimal Gamage, cosmetic surgeon, internal medicine specialist, and a cardiologist. Today I'm going to talk about epigenetics. Epigenetics is the study of factors which control our genes, but not exactly from the genes. First evidence came about epigenetics in 1944 to 1945. We knew that there was a huge famine affecting the Netherlands, and at that time they were occupied by the German army, and some of the mothers who were pregnant could not get a lot of food during the last months of their pregnancy. So they had small birth weight babies because of this malnutrition. And in Netherlands they kept these records about their population diligently. So we found out that the babies who were born at that time with small birth weights could not gain weight throughout their lifetime, and even their children could not gain weight. So something affected these children, which affected their whole life as well as their children's whole life. And again, we know that the children who are abused or neglected early in their life have a lot of mental problems later on in their lives. Another thing we know is that if the fathers are starved during the slowest growth period is in males is the time period leading up to the puberty, and then suddenly they have a growth spurt and they grow rapidly. And when the males or fathers were starved in this period and they have children, and those children have more children later on, all these people were found to have lower risk of death. So something again which happened to the father affected the children and the grandchildren, and it was something from the environment, not from the genes. We know today that human genome is mapped and only 2% of our genes actually code for the proteins we need for life. And we also know that certain cells contain the genome for the lifetime, like neurons. And also we know that our skin cells on top of our skin only live for like 5 weeks, and so therefore we know that this genetic code is very important for our life and for our structure. But only 2% of this genetic code actually makes proteins, so other 98% actually is involved with suppression of that genetic code, because we probably carry genes from different time periods throughout the history of the human evolution, and the humans are best form of animal not because they have a lot of genes, because they have the best control of their genes. And epigenetics is the study of these outside factors which actually control the genes, and these epigenetic factors are actually transferred to children and grandchildren as well. And now we know how this happens. It happens because DNA is what carries our genetic code, as we know, and you can have methylation of the DNA which deactivates DNA. That's one way of suppressing the code. Then the DNA or chromosomes are packed into proteins called histones, and we also know that acetylation of the lysine components of histones also can suppress the genes. Then there are non-coding RNAs which can be used to regulate genes. Usually RNAs are coding for proteins, but there are RNAs called non-coding RNAs, we call it ncRNA, which actually regulate genes. And then there are also microRNAs which can regulate the codon, which suppress the genes. And today we know that sometimes problems with non-coding RNA and microRNAs actually are the reasons for some of the cancers. Then how does this epigenetics, or how does this new science show up in the animal world? We know that the bees, all the bees when they're born, they have the same genetic code. They look the same for 3 days of their life. And how do we get the queens? The queen bees, although they have the same genetic code, are given the royal jelly, which is produced by a special gland in the worker ants, and they become queen bees, whereas the rest of the ants become worker bees. So the diet and proper nutrition is actually very important in these ants for formation of the queens. Then we also know that what we do with our diet is very important, not just for us, it's also important for our grandchildren and children, because the changes we cause for our genes or the genetic code with all the mechanisms we mentioned before, which is methylation of DNA, acetylation of histones, and also non-coding RNAs and the microRNAs can actually be passed on to our children and grandchildren. Therefore, when we are on the proper diet, which doesn't give us any diseases, we know that we are doing something good for our children and grandchildren as well. So we hear this sometimes that people say, oh, I can eat whatever I want because I don't really care about my life as long as I provide for my children. But now we know that if you do wrong with your diet and your lifestyle, you're actually doing wrong for your children and grandchildren, because you're going to pass on this information through epigenetics into your next generations. That makes it even more important that we all follow a proper diet, and that is what a caring person would do.